Okay, we're picking up on chapter 17 with Bob Ewell testifying. Atticus is questioning him now in the Tom Robinson trial. We're on page 93 in the online version and 234 if you're reading out of the text. So let's hear what will Atticus's first question be now that he has Mayella Ewell's father on the stand. Mr. Ewell, Atticus began, folks were doing a lot of running that night. Let's see. You say you ran to the house, you ran to the window, you ran inside, you ran to Mayella, you ran for Mr. Tate. Did you, during all this running, run for a doctor? Wasn't no need to. I seen what happened. All right, so there's that question. The second time Atticus is asking that question. First of Heck Tate the sheriff, and now of Bob Ewell. Why might he think this question of a doctor not being called for? It's been established twice now that a doctor was not called for. Why would he want the jury to see that? What does it seem to suggest about Bob Ewell that he didn't get Mayella to a doctor? And do you think Atticus believes that if a doctor had been called, that evidence might make his case stronger? So Bob Ewell says, wasn't no need to. I seen what happened. But there's one thing I don't understand, said Atticus. Weren't you concerned with Mayella's condition? I most positively was, said Mr. Ewell. I seen who done it. Meaning he was afraid maybe that Tom Robinson had got her pregnant from raping her and that she would have a mixed baby as a result, is what the underlying implication is there. No, I mean her physical condition. Did you not think the nature of her injuries warranted immediate medical attention? What? Didn't you think she should have had a doctor immediately? The witness said he had never thought of it. He had never called a doctor to any of his in his life, and if he had, it would have cost him $5. That all? He asked. Not quite, said Atticus casually. Mr. Ewell, you heard the sheriff's testimony, didn't you? How's that? You were in the courtroom when Mr. Heck Tate was on the stand, weren't you? You heard everything he said, didn't you? Mr. Ewell considered the matter carefully and seemed to decide that the question was safe. Yes, he said. And do you agree with his description of Mayella's injuries? How's that? Atticus looked around at Mr. Gilmer and smiled. Mr. Ewell seemed determined not to give the defense the time of day. Mr. Tate testified that her right eye was blackened and that she was beaten around the— Oh, yeah, said the witness. I hold with everything Tate said. You do, said Atticus mildly. Well, I just want to make sure. He went to the court reporter, said something, and the reporter entertained us for some minutes by reading Mr. Tate's testimony as if it were stock market quotations. Her right eye, her left. Oh, yes, that'd make it her right. It was her right eye, Mr. Finch. I remember now. She was boned. He flipped the page. Up on that side of the face, Sheriff. Please repeat what you said. It was her right eye, I said. Thank you, Bert, said Atticus. Now, you've heard it again, Mr. Ewell. Do you have anything to add to it? Do you agree with the sheriff? I holds with Tate. Her eye was blacked and she was mighty beat up. The little man seemed to have forgotten his previous humiliation from the bench. It was becoming evident that he thought Atticus an easy match. He seemed to grow ruddy again. His chest swelled, and once more he was a little red rooster. I thought he'd burst his shirt at Atticus's next question. Mr. Ewell, can you read and write? Mr. Gilmer interrupted. Objection, he said. Can't see what the witness's literacy has to do with the case. Irrelevant and immaterial. Judge Taylor was about to speak, but Atticus said, Now, Judge, if you'll allow the question plus another one, you'll soon see. All right, let's see, said Judge Taylor. But make sure we see, Atticus. Overruled. Mr. Gilmer seemed as curious as the rest of us as to what bearing the state of Mr. Ewell's education had on the case. I'll repeat the question, said Atticus. Can you read and write? I most positively can. Will you write your name and show us? I most positively will. How do you think I sign my relief checks? Mr. Yule was endearing himself to his fellow citizens. The whispers and chuckles below us probably had something to do with what a card he was. I was becoming nervous. Atticus seemed to know what he was doing, but it seemed to me that he'd gone frog sticking without a light. Never, never, never on cross-examination ask a witness a question you don't already know the answer to, was a tenet I absorbed with my baby food. Do it, and you'll often get an answer you don't want, an answer that can wreck your case. Atticus was reaching into the inside pocket of his coat. He drew out an envelope and then reached into his vest pocket and unclipped his fountain pen. He moved leisurely and had turned so that he was in full view of the jury. He unscrewed the fountain pen cap and placed it gently on the table. He shook the pen a little, then handed it with the envelope to the witness. "Would you write your name for us?" he asked. "Clearly now, so the jury can see you do it." Mr. Yule wrote on the back of the envelope and looked up complacently to see Judge Taylor staring at him as if he were some fragrant gardenia in full bloom on the witness stand, to see Mr. Gilmer half sitting, half standing at his table. The jury was watching him, one man leaning forward with his hands on the railing. "What's so interesting?" he asked. "You're left-handed, Mr. Yule," said Judge Taylor. Mr. Yule turned angrily to the judge and said he didn't see what his being left-handed had to do with it, that he was a Christ-fearing man and Atticus Finch was taking advantage of him. Tricking lawyers like Atticus Finch took advantage of him all the time with their tricking ways. He had told him what had happened, and he'd say it again and again, which he did. Nothing Atticus asked him after that shook his story. That he'd looked through the window, then he'd ran the Negro off, and then ran off for the sheriff. Atticus finally dismissed him. Mr. Gilmer asked him one more question. "About your writing with your left hand. Are you ambidextrous, Mr. Gilmer, or Mr. Yule?" Ambidextrous, for those of you that don't know, means that you can write just as well with both hands, your left and your right. "I most positively am not. I can use one hand good as the other. One hand good as the other," he added, glaring at the defense table. Jem seemed to be having a quiet fit. He was pounding the balcony rail softly, and once he whispered, "We've got him." I didn't think so. Atticus was trying to show, it seemed to me, that Mr. Yule could have beaten up Mayella. That much I could follow. If her right eye was blackened and she was mostly beat up on the right side of her face, it would tend to show that a left-handed person did it. Sherlock Holmes and Jem Finch would agree. But Tom Robinson could easily be left-handed too. Like Mr. Hecate, I imagined a person facing me and went through a swift mental pantomime and concluded that he might have held her with his right hand and pounded her with his left. I looked down at him. His back was to us, but I could see his broad shoulders and bull-thick neck. He could easily have done it. I thought Jem was counting his chickens. Okay, that's the end of chapter 17. I'd like for you now to answer the rest of those last 3 questions in the study guide for chapter 17. You can take a picture of your study guide page and email that to me so I can give you credit for the work. You can find a copy of the email on Schoology if you didn't bring one home, so you've got everything you need to be successful. So I want to see you emailing that work. I hope to hear from you soon. Take care of yourselves. I miss you.